Hi, everyone, and welcome to Chai Side Chats, co-presented by Creativity Awakening in Jayamangala. This is an exclusive interdisciplinary talk show featuring interviews with folks about creativity, the arts, healing, mental and emotional well-being, personal growth, and process, among a variety of other topics. I am your host, Aishwarya Subramanian, and for today's episode, I'm really excited to have with me two immensely talented visual artists. Trained in the mediums of kolam and tanjore style painting, my first guest is a Maryland-based artist whose work frequently combines elements of the scientific and the spiritual to explore known and unknown aspects of reality. My second guest is a Bay Area-based painter and calligrapher whose background as a Punjabi Sikh woman in the diaspora clearly inspires the iconography of her creative expression. I have personally had the privilege of being part of collaborations with both of these artists, and I'm really looking forward to an inspiring conversation with them today on Chai Side Chats. Please welcome Shanthi Chandrasekar and Rupy C. Hi, welcome to Chai Side Chats. Thank you both so much for being here. I want to get started with our conversation today to talk about intuition, which I think is a really important part of any creative process. And I'd love to hear just about what your personal definition or relationship to intuition is and kind of how it guides your own work as artists and some of the ideas that you create in your artwork.
Intuition is a huge part of my work. It doesn't have to be when I'm painting, but it's just sitting and thinking. I love daydreaming, and I love to read up a lot, do a lot of research. I'm just interested in so many things. And then when I sit to do work, what flows through, I think, is intuition. Like it's something that you don't know what you're drawing from, trying to go where. So you don't know what you're drawing from, and you don't know where you're going, and you just go with the flow. And it's a beautiful moment when you can do that. And I think that's what I try to achieve in my work when I sit down, or not, or just dream.
Firstly, thank you, Shanti, for defining intuition for me right now, because I think consciously I don't think about it when I'm working day to day. But now that I think about how does intuition kind of guide me in my studio, it's I feel like intuitively something that bothers me is what guides me in the studio. So if something that I'm coming across in life, and I always believe that artists have to live life in order to create. So living life is a huge part of creating, because you can't just be in your studio all the time. You can't be in a vacuum. So whenever I'm living that life, which is whether, being up in the morning, making tea, or sometimes even just putting my clothes away after doing laundry, all these tasks that are very tedious sometimes is where I feel like I'm connecting with myself, and my intuition is kind of building up with all these ideas that when I come to the studio, I'm excited sometimes about one or two of the ideas. And often what I end up creating is something that's just bothered me in the last month or last week, but not necessarily something that I wanted to create. But it's on and off. It's like having a friend with you in the studio who doesn't really talk and who lets you be, but always nudges you positively.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great that it's like the image of like a friend who's like always there with you. I'm wondering if either of you could like give an example of, something that emerged from your intuition, like maybe you didn't know when you went into the studio what you were thinking about or what was going to come up, but then you created something. Do you have a particular example that comes to mind for that?
I think recently, even just because I'm returning to the studio after maternity leave, right? And I was actually waiting to see what my inner intuition guides me to do, because it's just been like 3 months of not creating work. And then now all of a sudden I'm being thrown into midst of paper, pencils, brushes, and colors. So an example would be that I started creating this collection, but not wanting this collection to be anything having to do with women, just wanting to just create, because sometimes it takes time to get back into things. And this collection is now like the drawings are building towards what I have been experiencing the last 3 months. And in terms of what moments of, it's moments of grief, moments of happiness, moments of tiredness, moments of surprise, right? All these moments are then building. So intuition is kind of guiding me to pick that next moment, I would say, like, to curate what I'm creating. I feel like in that way, it's working out for me, because this collection is now becoming about those moments of different, sometimes conflicting emotions in the same moment, right? But that's intuition guiding me to the, okay, well, you can jump to this next and you can jump to that next. Because I feel like when you are out of a situation and when you're in the studio, it's all that your body remembers, your mind remembers, and it's kind of being processed through your intuition on what I might want to do next.
For me, I think I've had lots of moments when, I've, I have felt this, like the intuition sort of seep through. And there's one especially I remember because I could see it happen, follow it. Like in the sense, I was like, I have the series called Chakra, like which is all spiral, like I do freehand spiral. What I was trying to get was a vortex of dots moving around. Like, when I close my eyes, I see that those dots move. And I was trying to get that. And I used a spiral to sort of work towards that direction. But it was not doing what I wanted it to do exactly. But it was another set of paintings that was coming out, and I was totally having fun with it. But there's this one time when I said, I figured out maybe if I create my own tool, I could make those dots move. And it hit me over like the middle of the night or whatever. Then in the morning, I got my tool, like with dots and everything, I made this. By the time I left my home and went to my studio, like a half-hour drive, I said, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And I knew the moment I touched that, I did completely different. So the processing had happened in the background. I worked intuitively there, though I had sort of said, oh, I figured out a way to do it. But when I touched the canvas, it was a completely different. I was like, when did this happen? And it actually was the closest to what I had imagined. All of the spirals were all trying. And so, that's something I think about intuition is, I think, with artists, we think about the creative process as divergent thinking, and then you have the convergent thinking, and usually people don't connect convergent thinking with artists, but without the convergent thinking, you're just going to be there with 1,000 ideas, not knowing which one to choose. But you need the convergent thinking there. And I think with intuition, it is this balance between the divergent thinking and convergent thinking at the same time. And you bypass all the intermediate steps and you just go there and then you do it, but the processing has been happening. And I think, this has been my take on it, and this has been my experience with it.
Shanti, I'm loving the scientific terms of divergent and convergent. Looks like we have a lot in common in that way.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, because I think they also talk about like how artists are probably predominantly using one side of their brain, but this is really kind of going against that idea that, like, it requires more than just that. And actually that kind of brings me to another question that I wanted to ask you both about your own like inspirations and how you decide what elements to incorporate into your artwork. I know both of you take inspiration from your own identities as well as from things happening in the world around us. And I'm curious about maybe getting a little bit more into that process of decision making, of how do you choose which elements from like the external world and from your own internal world and your own like life to incorporate into your work.
It's like a curation of symbolism is what I do. So a lot of my paintings are, even if it's a figure or whether it's any type of a setting, there's a lot of symbolism that I try to build in so that the painting becomes a sort of a scavenger hunt. If you're really looking carefully, you're looking and finding new ideas and new things I'm hinting at. And it's kind of, the process is dittoed in the studio. So when I'm building the painting and building the drawing, and with miniature painting, the drawing is built actually very clean, in a very clean way. It's not a messy sketch. The drawing is as beautiful usually as the painting, sometimes even better, because it just has line work and it doesn't have color. So for me, building that drawing is a curation of inspirations that might be rooted into that idea. So if, for example, like one of the paintings I did recently called The Time Traveler, and that was, a female of a figure, and the painting speaks to the power of foresight that women have, so that the painting basically says that, women can time travel because they have such great foresight, because that's what I've experienced in my world. So in that way, the initial idea came from the women around me, and how, you know, your mom or your grandmother's always saying, well, this might happen, you should prepare for this, or that might happen, you should prepare for that. And then being a mom myself, I was doing the same thing, anticipating what my toddler would do or things like that. So I think initially inspiration comes from this personal expression of identity, and also the different identities around you who have imprinted on you in many ways. But then when it comes to the building of the painting stage, you know, then I start to add symbolism to this figure of the time traveler, for example. You know, what is she carrying? What is she holding? What is she wearing? And all those things kind of trace back to a very specific meaning, right? So if she's wearing orange, is that because she is a revolutionary figure? Is she wearing green because she's a figure connected to nature more often? You know, and these things are what I enjoy then doing when I'm building the drawing. Is she carrying a book because she's recording everything that she's seeing in the world? Is she carrying, you know, a rosary, or is because she's spiritual and she's connecting all that she's seeing back to this, you know, deep-rooted spirituality that she follows in her life? So for me, that's the fun part, where I am taking different inspirations that inspire me, but then kind of infusing them into the character. It's like playing someone on stage, you know, for dancers. So I get to play someone on the when I paint, because then I get to include all these different ideas in, which come from my inspirations, basically.
So like my work is also like with a lot of symbolism. And I think for me, what I have been doing is whatever I wanted to learn, something new, different, I use art as my medium to work on that. And so the inspiration is like, it could be a drop of water, you know, it could be the bird flying or a leaf falling, or it could be like, you know, something, a word that someone says, and a lot of science. So, you know, I read and I listen to a lot of science, and it could vary from cosmology to neuroscience, and then languages, you know, that's another something. So for me, that's the one thing is I don't know if it's good or bad, but I just don't stick to one thing. I just keep floating around. I move from, you know, like I said, I would do very, like the columns, like a very traditional art form. I would do that. I would do the Tanjore painting. But then I would also make a Tanjore style painting with acrylic, where Krishna, you can feel the movement of Krishna there instead of a very static image. So I like to move to that. Then I would come back, and sometimes I like to sit and focus, have the starting point and take it all the way, you know, to the goal, kind of. I've done that, like especially when it's scientifically accurate pieces, you have to do that. You know, you can't put in your thoughts and say, you know, the coral is going to look like this, or this butterfly is going to change. No, it doesn't work that way. But then what I always do on the side is I have this piece, or I'll have a canvas that is just as a palette, and I would just put paint on it, and it will build itself. And suddenly one day when I look at it, I'm like, this is where it has to go next. And there is this constant dialogue with the medium, because I think I'm a medium too, and the paper and the pencil and the ink and the paint, they're also mediums. So it's just that, you know, we are interacting, and there is something else that, so sometimes you know, sometimes you don't know. But there's one thing that you had mentioned earlier, like about how do you decide on something? In the beginning, like I remember many years ago, you know, I would take this one painting and I would put all my thoughts into it. I'm like, okay, you know, I want to do this and I want this and this. And then there was this one senior artist in India, like in Chennai, I met him. And he said, your work is really nice, but you're trying to cram everything into one piece. You don't have to do that. And it seemed like a very simple advice, but it meant a lot to me in the sense that I don't have to do everything there. So what happens is, if I'm not able to decide between this or that brushstroke or color, that just becomes another painting. So I'll work with the one that I've already started, the one that I know, I think I want to go in a certain direction. The next painting will incorporate the other part of it. So what happens is there's this continuity. So you're constantly working. So it's not like, you know, you take a break and you finish and then come back. This process is like breathing or the heartbeat. it just keeps going.
I like what you said, Shanti, about the actual materials inspiring you as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a bit I was going to ask you also, that if you feel that, because I feel like the paper that I'm using in miniature painting, or the actual, you know, the brushes are so specifically built in Jaipur, and just all the materials associated, especially with traditional arts, they're also very inspiring because you want to kind of connect to them, because they're so rooted in the, you know, in our tradition and in our identity, that you want to pick them up and do something with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I am so glad you spoke to that too.
I think it is that understanding and knowing, because materials have their own nature, you know, and you have to respect that and then work with that, rather than say, I'm going to make this look like something else, what it is not. And I think that is important. And I think, you know, like with your work, like Rupy, like, you know, you have a traditional format, then you have the traditional materials, and within that, you try to find your voice. And I think it has to all come together. And I think, you know, that's one of the ways to work, is pay attention to the medium too.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is very important, because I think we can't push it too much.
Mm-hmm.
Even if something is, you know, like, for example, for me, if an idea is just bothering me a lot and I need to get it on paper or pen, or I mean, just I need to sketch it, or I need to get that idea out of me, I can't push it if the idea is not ready.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I feel so bad, because sometimes something has happened around me and I want to express it right away, but I can't, because the idea is not ready, and I can't push it onto paper. And sometimes the materials push back on you too,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't just, you know, with this handmade pen paper, you can't, I don't even use pencil on it, because you can't, because if you erase, you literally alter the paper and it's a mark. So yeah, this notion of you not pushing yourself and not pushing the materials, or things pushing back sometimes and stopping you, that happens quite often. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, no, since we're talking about just different mediums, actually, one of the things I wanted to share too is just like, you know, in my training as an expressive arts therapist, one of the things we were introduced to in visual art is that, especially when we're introducing them to like clients, different media are connected to also like eliciting different emotional reactions, or like different parts of your like ways that you process, whether that's sensory or kinesthetic or more like cognitive. And so I'm really curious if, you know, certain mediums have certain like emotional impact on either of you. And like, if you notice, like, for example, when I'm working with acrylic, like I feel a particular way, or when I'm working with watercolor or something else, like, just, I'm curious about your own like internal responses and reactions that come up with using different media. Cause I know both of you have worked in a variety of different ways with art. So
Yeah, like I talked to you about like the pen and ink. A lot of times I just tend to go to that because it's so immediate. I touch and it is the closest that I can get to it. It's like there is no thinking. I mean, I can just touch there and there'll be a blot there maybe, or a line there. And depending on my pressure and the pressure that the paper will also give back, I will get a line. And being constantly aware of that. And there are sheets, people will just look at me and say, what's the difference between this white and that white? But there is a difference. There is a difference in the brush. There is a difference in the, and I think that is the part that you don't separate them. You think of them as part of you. And then when you work on it, there are like sometimes when you're like you said, like a Rupy, like, you know, sometimes there's this idea in your head and then it doesn't come out because there's something that is blocking. And that happens with the medium too. And like sometimes I will just make punch holes, just punch holes. And that is all I need to do, is to punch holes. You know, I mean, like, who wants to paint? Who wants to draw? You know, kind of. And it's just, it's so meditative that sometimes I think it's the mind, the body, the paper that is in front of you, or the material that is there. There's a calling. It could be right in front of you the whole year and you don't touch it. But then there is suddenly something that makes you go to that paper or that canvas or a half-done painting, and you know you're ready to continue from there. And I think being open to it is what it's all about, I think, to receive and to give. And I think, that emotional part of it, if the paper for some reason is telling you, in a very subtle way that I don't want to be painted on right now, just leave it alone.
I feel like I am building my answers off of what you say, because you say so much of what I feel too. For me, it's been firstly nice to be able to work in different mediums before I came to traditional arts, because traditional arts ask a very different level of patience and a very different level of commitment and devotion. So I'll speak about that in a bit, but I think calligraphy, for example, for me, I approached it because I wanted to be free. And like Shantiji said, pen and paper, or in this case, a nib and ink and paper, are something that's gratifying instantly because you can create something instantly. So when I know that I have a short attention span for an idea, for example, then that's when I would approach an ink a nib and paper. But eventually I feel like when you grow as an artist, and ideas tend to sometimes brew more and more, and they need more time to kind of travel through you, that's when for me I would approach something like acrylic. Acrylics for me, it's it's instantly drying, so again the idea of instant gratification plays in, but also the idea of being able to go over an error really quickly. I think for me, even though in life I'm very easygoing, as an artist I'm not. As an artist, mistakes are kind of blunders, you can say, it can cost me a lot. So when it comes to traditional arts, those blunders are kind of magnified if they happen. And the emotional connection there to approach that medium, I cannot be rushed if I pick up traditional arts for any reason. For example, even in the art world, there's a huge commercial rush to create. You want to be able to create and create and create and produce and produce and produce. But with traditional arts, you cannot do that. It's actually the opposite. For me, I think creating 12 large paintings a year is high production, right? So, and that could be very low production for someone who's working with acrylics or oils even. So you have to be okay with the idea that I'm not going to accomplish anything. So the end goal is not what you have in mind when I approach traditional arts. It has to be the journey and the process that you are falling in love with, and that's what you're pursuing. So emotionally you have to be in that space. And the other thing is that you cannot feel insecure. If I'm insecure about something, like I haven't produced anything, I need to get a big piece done or else. So if I've been feeling insecure about anything, traditional arts are like, back off, you're done. You're not going to get anything done. And if you do get it done, it won't be high quality. So these are the different, and it's great that you're asking this question because I haven't thought about it this way, but yeah, there's different types of emotions I feel. And for me, I think the added mediums to all of this, like, even having done dance productions or writing or talking, these are also mediums to create with, right? When we're talking about our work, and I strongly encourage all artists that I've ever mentored, or all artists I work with, that you need to learn to talk about what you're doing, because that also is a way of expressing what you're doing and a way of processing what you're doing. And then writing, I always, whenever I finish a piece, I write about it, because that is another layer of, yourself that you need to put in words, and express whatever you've created in words is very important as well. So yeah, it's just different mediums that encourage you to do different things with the same idea. Yeah. But generally I'm happy when I'm creating, so it's okay.
Yeah, thank you both so much for sharing about that. I think I always wonder about that, especially with folks who are professional artists. Like, I'm obviously not a professional visual artist, so like I experience frustration in different ways when I'm working with different media. And I think even moving beyond that, I just want to transition a little bit and ask about, since both of you have collaborated with dancers, which is another medium of art that we're working with, like folks who are expressing ideas through their body, through gestures, things like that. So I'm curious about how your process of collaborating with other dancers has been. And is it more linear? Is it more non-linear? Like, does one come first? Or just curious about how those kinds of things are navigated.
I think any art form, it's like we've been talking about the different medium, and like dance is also another way to communicate. And it is, it's more immediate in that, there is music. It's to all the different senses is what happens there. Like a number of senses, like when you're drawing, when you have the paint and the ink and smell, but when you're looking at a dance and watching, there is a lot of subtle things that are there in it that is not visible. But for me, when I watch, for me it becomes a canvas that's constantly changing. When I watch a dance performance, it's like, I sometimes people are like, I'll pick things and say, how did you notice that? And I'm like, because for me, each one is like a series of canvases or series of paintings moving. Like if there is a pose that you're standing in, for me, I'm looking at everyone there. And so that's one way that I have been connected with dance for a long time. But when Vijay Palaparthi and Nalini Prakash from the Spelling Ink Dance in 2017, they approached me and asked me if I could make a painting that would be part of the set, and part of the dance performance for Srishti Layankari. When they came up with the idea and the concept, that was so close to my heart, like about energy, about Devi, and it just something that I had been working on myself. So it seemed like we could work together, because it's one more medium added, like the visual aspect of it as a painting added on to something that is moving. And so I think it turned out really well for that. And then Anuradha Nehru from Kalanidhi, she had the Bhumi production, and hers was different, where she just asked if she could take pictures of previously done work that would go with her theme. So then with your dance school, Jayamangala's, the Navagraha, which was again an idea that I have been wanting to work on. Navagraha, I had done a painting and I just wanted to explore it further, and I was like postponing that. And when your mother had approached me, I was like, this is the opportunity to work on that. And when I watched all of these performances, it was just absolutely wonderful to feel that there is another way to look at the artwork, another way to look at dance. When you bring them together, it just adds, it's a more whole kind of feeling of like, the music, the movement, and the static. There is, and I think it was very good. And I think the part of the collaboration that I also enjoyed a lot was to listen to how dancers and choreographers work, in putting together, because both are very creative processes, but there's a difference. I just can sit in my studio or sit out or go anywhere and I think, and then I just pull up something, I draw. Here it is just how many people have to be taken into account. I was like, it took me some time to digest that for me, I've just been so independent. I've not had to rely on anybody else for the work. But here, how you're able to pull together. And I think that was another part of balancing that I had to learn while working with dance collaborations.
Yeah, there's a lot that I can build on what Shanti said. Definitely, even now, just the idea of how many people are involved in a production or in putting together something on stage is just amazing for me, because I mean, I love working solo and I actually like it, but it's also great to then sometimes take a break and work with multiple people, in a collaboration. But for me, the dance collaboration I did with Nadi Tekek, who's the choreographer, but also artistic director for Nava. When we collaborated, it was more from a point of, being interested in the same ideas. And I think for me, at the core of it, whether it's a dancer, whether it's another artist, whether it's someone who's an instrumentalist or whatever the discipline might be, for me, the ideas have to align, but also more than that, the values have to align. So my values as an artist and her values as an artist were in alignment, and that's why we worked together. And also, I think one of the main things that a lot of artists I end up meeting or but not sometimes working with. The one misalignment happens is that my traditional art is kind of my devotion. Like yeah, of course I sell my work and there's all these things and I get paid for my work, whatever, all that. But at the end of the day, my paintings are my ways of worshiping what I do. And, work is worship for me in some ways. So this idea is, I think, something that is ingrained in Bharatanatyam dancers also, because there is this idea of guru and disciple. There's this idea of course, the healthy form of that, but there's also this idea of, being revering your art form. So for me with dancers, especially Bharatanatyam dancers, that was the best part of working together. And then of course, values aligning and doing a production together on top of working on artwork together was of course a thrilling experience, because I never had, directed a production before. But I think at the end of it, it was how much research has gone into it, how much have we digested each idea, what are the clear emotions we want from a piece. And we both worked really hard on that for 2 years before the production came to life, right? So whether you work with someone or not, you obviously have to respect their work, you have to love their work. So for me, that has to be there, and that was there for sure. And then the beauty in how dancers and the language of Bharatanatyam, the visual gestures and what it expresses, is something I loved learning about. Like what Shanti was saying, that sometimes an idea is great for you because you're learning so much from it and you're learning so much because of it. So I got to learn so much about Bharatanatyam, and to this point where now I can watch a performance and slightly know if it's a good dancer or not. Like you can just be like, wow, the abhinaya here is amazing and this person's just brilliant. Because as a result of research, I also watched a lot of dance, bringing out the ideas together. So if there's an emotion of nostalgia we're trying to provoke as a dancer and as a visual artist, it was never about, okay, you do your art form and I'll do mine, and then let's put it on together. So it wasn't like that for us, because I think that's still an independent process of creating that. The idea was to create together. So for both of us, bringing life to something that was stationary, which is an art form, even though I did ended up incorporating a lot of video projections of the artwork. And I think the idea was that, okay, the dancer is another character in the painting, and the painting is another dancer on stage. So that's how we looked at it, and that's what we concluded as the way we wanted to collaborate.
Yeah, no, I think what you both have sort of pointed to is just how much learning happens, right, in any kind of collaboration. Like when you're exposed to different people's ways of working or different creative processes, I think there's so much learning that can happen. And I've learned so much today in our conversation just about how both of you approach your own work. So yeah, thank you so much for just sharing about all of that. I want to transition now into our experiential activity for today. So, in the field of expressive arts therapy, we have this concept or this idea called aesthetic response. And basically it's like a creative or artistic response to something. And traditionally in like a psychotherapy setting, it's usually like a therapist's response to art that maybe the client has shared or whatever they've just, if they're shared their story or something like that. But yeah, our activity for today is kind of based off of that idea of aesthetic response. And we're going to do some art making in response to music today. So I'm going to play a song, an instrumental song for a few minutes. And I invite you to just take a few moments and notice whatever comes up for you in listening to this song, any emotions, thoughts, reactions, whatever it is. And then once you feel like you've landed on like something concrete, some feeling or some idea or anything, based on your initial response to the music, you can begin to create something. And I'm keeping it open. So I know both of you are visual artists. So if you want to work within your mediums, that's totally fine. But I also want to open it up if you want to do some writing or if you want to like move or dance or like something else that's outside of what you usually do. And like I've done with some of my previous experiential activities, I want to encourage all of my viewers to participate as well. I mean, this is just listening and responding to music. So yeah, I invite you to explore and see what comes up. yeah, I would just love to hear what came up for both of you in the process.
I'll go first. For me, I think maybe it's a hot day. All I could think of was water from the music. So water and birds. I think in general, I'm just more connected to the natural elements around me. So, and I'm also right now behind the screen is this, there's a lot of foliage behind me. So probably just that. It's just a bunch of water waves, line work basically. And specifically the bird that came to mind for me was a heron. I don't know why, but I think in general, there was this poem that I read once about part of the research I did for Broken Seeds. There was a poem by Jibananda Das about herons and, becoming a heron and flying back to your homeland. So the music reminded me of that. So I started doing a heron, but I don't think it's just what it is. Yes. It's the exercise that matters. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, it's the process that matters. Exactly.
Yeah. Just letting go. Yes.
Yeah.
When I do my artwork, I don't listen to music. People usually ask me what kind of music I listen to, and I don't, because it will seep into my work. And so for me, I respond to, I see lines in my head. I don't know, like word is seeing, but every time I listen to any kind of music, there are images in my head and my hands move with that. And I've done some series. And so this is sort of something like that. So it's just, it just like, there's a flow to it. I usually call them like, like it's a spiral song. Some of this Indian music and film songs, I'll say, oh, that's a spiral song. That is a song that goes this way. And I'm like, no one gets it. But for me, that's the way I would even say if someone is going off, is like, oh, their line just went off this curve. And so for me, that's what I found was, I just thought of myself floating above this water and between the mountains, and the clouds. It sort of seemed to get that kind of a feel for like exploring. And I think listening to this music and what is happening is tend to pay attention to the minutest of sounds. And I think it becomes, I think that's one aspect that I enjoy.
I love that. I think there's so much water imagery. I actually ended up doing something similar too, just a lot of like blues and stuff. So there's definitely some flow in the collective unconscious today with that song. So well, that brings us to the end of our episode, but I just wanted to thank you both so much for being on this episode of Chai Side Chats. I've really enjoyed all of our conversations about process and intuition and our experiential activity at the end. So yeah, I want to wish both of you all the best with all of your work. Hopefully we will be able to collaborate again sometime in the future. That would be amazing. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Chai Side Chats with Rupy and Shanthi Ji about visual art, intuition, and all of the wonderful things that they shared about their process. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are going to be taking a little bit of a break on episodes for Chai Side Chats, but please do subscribe to the channel, catch up on some of our previous episodes, and we will be back very soon with our next set of interviews with artists. Thank you so much.